Chapter 8, Simplicity in Business. So far we've seen all the 6 pillars that are um, provided in this book for peak performance, and now we're going to use all of them into applying it into a business situation. And we're going to start off with looking at some examples on great businesses that are built using these principles. First one, Vanguard. We all know what Jack Bogle did with introducing Vanguard. It is the largest fund today in the entire planet. It has passive investments um, across the globe, and it is very easy to understand. Their philosophy was simple. We want to pass on as limited as possible of expenses to the clients, and so low cost, easy to understand, simpler number of mutual funds that they introduced. So that was huge. It took them a long time. Fees was something that was quite prevalent with the competitors of Vanguard, but they took a very unique position. They said, hey, we're going to go in a very counter position fashion and position ourselves to be the lowest in cost. So they did everything possible to reduce costs. They even changed bonuses to incentivize their managers to reduce costs. Their bonuses were tied inversely to the cost passed on to the client. They also reduced some funds that were very volatile, that required lots of trading, like very small cap funds. And so when you build something as simple but super powerful, it's also easy to understand. Like all of your team members, all of your leaders can now actually implement it, and there is a high chance that they'll implement it without an error. So understanding is easy. Simpler strategy is easy to understand, it's easy to execute, but also is self-correcting. If at any point the costs go up, then you can quickly find out what is the weakest link. So simpler strategies are very powerful, and they focused on it. They chose one and then they focused on it. So that was huge contribution by Vanguard, and that is what led to their power. I've also covered Vanguard in 7 Powers book in counter positioning strategy. So that's another video to check out if you want to understand more about Vanguard and what they did. Herb Keller, right? We know he passed away 2019, but Southwest. At that time, there were 3 other major carriers when Southwest was launched. They were super expensive, not at all competitive in terms of the amount of money that they were charging versus their cost. There was a huge differential. And so Herb Keller said, hey, we're going to launch a low cost, highly efficient airline. And that's where Southwest was born today. Southwest is one of the top 4 largest domestic travelers. As a percentage of domestic travelers, Southwest is one of the top 4 in the United States. So it's huge in terms of how they focused on one simple thing. We're going to go with low cost. And so they innovated around cost. They reduced multiple things that introduce cost. For example, they reduced seating, pre-assigned seating. So that requires, the passengers to go in a specific time, and so it takes too long to everyone to get in because of specific seating. So they reduced meals in the flight because that takes time to load and serve and all of that. They don't serve meals except for some peanuts, right? So they've organized their entire fleet around like, hey, if our planes are on in the air and not on the ground, then they are being utilized. And when they're utilized, they've optimized for them to be off the ground as quickly as possible. That reduces their cost. So there's a 15-minute, like the best in industry time around to get the passengers out, and then maybe 45 minutes to get the plane going. So huge. When they decided we're gonna make this as efficient as possible and we're gonna pass down all the cost benefits as much as possible, apart from their margin, now they have gained significant market share, right? So this was unique, original idea. So in each of these, I'm highlighting one uniqueness that comes by using some of the frameworks here, but each of these apply to each of these companies, right? Like we talked about Vanguard, it's easy to understand. Similarly, Southwest, easy to understand, but they also had a unique ideas likewise with Vanguard. Steve Jobs, right? We know with iPhone, like he was able to get a super diverse set of teams, like with a designer, from a designer, an engineer like Steve Wozniak and others, right? Like he was able to get a super diverse team to work together. They would probably like fight almost all the time, but with him as the mediator, as the conflict resolution guy, and as the boss, he was able to inspire them towards a common goal, right? So we covered this one in collaboration, right? So collaboration, if we do that well, and if we can bring unique, diverse set of talents together, then we can have an orchestra that we've talked about in the previous videos. Huge, focused area of work, simplicity to the core. Like we know the iPhone is such a simple phone, but it is so complex internally, right? Before iPhone, I remember it was the Nokia days. So if you remember the Nokia days, add a comment below. So I'd like to see how many of you remember the Nokia days. It was Nokia that was like super um, prevalent, and then Samsung came in. But when iPhone did its trick of like one button, and today there is no buttons, it's simplified to the core, a super complex 500 parts machinery into this one button framework, right? So there's lots of power in simplifying. When you simplify, you bring out, you hide the complexity, but you still can make it so good that people fall in love with the product, right? So, and that happens when you bring great set of people which are diverse in their background to focus on an organizational goal. And Aditya Puri, right, who built the biggest bank in terms of market capitalization in India, right? The HDFC Bank is also sometimes called as the SOP Bank, Standard Operating Procedure Bank. So they have defined like very strict rules that this is how we do it. Our job is to build a super strong CASA franchise. Like we want the current account, savings account, and we want to lend to people who are credible. And they have like so many standard operating procedures defined that deviating from it is just not possible, right? So it's spread across the entire bank, so everyone does it, right? So he built a massive bank from the 1990s, 2020, when he retired, almost a 20% return every year, every single year. So think about the compounding there, it's massive. So it comes from a simple focus of building a strong franchisee and then lending to credible borrowers. It's simple, right? But again, there's lots of complexity. It required huge amount of focus, but when you do that, you can build something massive and enduring. So why should we do simplicity? We covered all of these points, but I'll quickly summarize. It's easy to follow, execute, and it's self-correcting. It's unique ideas that you can bring to the table. Only that will work, and that's built on top of specialization. And when you focus, all of this requires like years and years of focus. Each of these examples that I shared with you, there at least each of those folks have worked in that industry for 20 years in the same company. They've been at it, like focus, like, and then they focus on one or two variables, right? They didn't like make everything a priority, but when they did make one thing a priority, they like went all in, and then they attacked it to the core. So focusing was something that they did. They also defined standard operating procedures that made it very simple to implement the strategy. And they brought in diverse set of team members together. So the checklist that's at the back of the book, which is such a fantastic thing that they've done in this book, which is to summarize all of our learnings. Do you define your organizational goals and vision in simple terms? Can you define it in like 10 words? If not, it's complicated, right? So you should be able to define it in simple terms. And do you keep revisiting it and making it, sharpening it, simplifying it further? Do you have standard operating procedures, and do you also have simple offerings. Like, do you like think about what when Apple did what it did, right? It started with iPod, and then it went to iPhone, and it's simple, like few devices, few offerings. They don't venture into like cars and things like that. They could easily, but they're like simple offerings, simple operating procedures, deep specialization that comes from lots of creativity and original thinking. So have we built that specialization? Have we built that niche? And do we play in that range, or do we like get distracted? So that is the key. And do you build and attract diverse set of team members and encourage them to build their identity and keep their identity, um, with that also focusing on the organizational goal together, and can you resolve conflicts and keep them working together? So these are the checklists for applying all of what we've learned, all the 6 principles into business. And we went through so many examples. We went through Aditya Puri of HDFC Bank, Steve Jobs for Apple, Herb Keller for Southwest, and John Bogle for Vanguard. Fantastic examples in this book. So we can use all of this, and we've seen how each of these leaders used each of these principles to make lasting and mega enterprises from very humble beginnings.